At 17 seconds past 8:15 in the morning, a single object slipped from the belly of an American bomber flying nearly 6 miles above a Japanese city. For the next 43 seconds, it simply fell. No sound, no warning, just a small, dark shape tumbling through the clear summer air toward 350,000 people who were starting an ordinary day. 43 seconds. That is about how long it has taken me to speak these few sentences. And in that tiny window of time, the people of Hiroshima were boiling water for breakfast. They were walking to work. Children were lining up in schoolyards. Soldiers were doing their morning exercises. Not one of them knew that the last grains of the old world were already running out of the hourglass. When those 43 seconds ended, around 80,000 of them were simply gone. Not wounded, not dying. Gone in a single flash of light, brighter than anything the sun has ever cast on the surface of the earth. This is the story of those 43 seconds. The morning when one aircraft, one bomb, and one decision opened a door that humanity has never managed to close again. The day our species learned for the first time that it finally held the power to end itself. Let us go back to the city before the flash. Hiroshima in the summer of 1945 was a city that had been strangely lucky. For 4 years, war had burned across the Pacific. Tokyo had been firebombed into ash. Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya, one after another, Japan's great cities had been gutted by American incendiary raids. But Hiroshima, a port city of around 350,000 people on the delta of the Ota River, had been spared almost entirely. A few stray bombs, nothing more. The people noticed. They whispered about it. Some said the city was being saved for something. Others, more hopefully, said perhaps it simply did not matter enough to bomb. But the terrible truth was the exact opposite of luck. Hiroshima had been deliberately left untouched. It had been placed on a short, secret list of cities that were to be preserved. Preserved so that when the new weapon came, its full and undisturbed power could be measured against a city that was still whole. Hiroshima was being kept clean for the experiment. How did it come to this? The weapon that was on its way had been born from the most secret and most expensive scientific project in history, the Manhattan Project. For 3 years, in hidden laboratories across the United States, more than 100,000 people had worked on it, many of them not even knowing what they were building. It had been born out of fear that Nazi Germany might build such a bomb first. But by the summer of 1945, Germany had already surrendered. Hitler was dead. The enemy the bomb had been designed to deter was gone. And yet, the project did not stop. It had taken on a momentum of its own. $2 billion had been spent. A weapon had been built, and a new American president, Harry Truman, who had only learned the bomb existed after taking office that April, now had to decide what to do with it. Japan was still fighting, fiercely, island by island. The Allies issued a final ultimatum from Potsdam, demanding unconditional surrender and warning of prompt and utter destruction. Japan's reply was read as a refusal, and so the order stood. On the morning of the 6th of August, the air raid sirens had actually sounded earlier, around 7, when a lone weather plane passed overhead. The all-clear came soon after. People relaxed. They came out of their shelters and went back to their routines, grateful that it was, once again, nothing. The streets filled, the trams ran, the day grew warm and bright under a near-cloudless sky. That clear sky was a death sentence. The men who were coming needed to see the city to aim. And now they could see it perfectly. High above, a B-29 superfortress was approaching. Her name was painted on her nose, Enola Gay, after the mother of her pilot, Colonel Paul Tibbets. In her bomb bay hung a single weapon, 10 feet long, weighing nearly 4.5 tons. The crew had nicknamed it Little Boy. Inside its steel casing sat 64 kilograms of enriched uranium and a mechanism of brutal simplicity. A design meant to fire one piece of uranium into another at enormous speed, slamming them together to start a chain reaction that would release the energy bound inside the atom itself. No weapon like it had ever been used on human beings. Only once, 3 weeks earlier, in a desert in New Mexico, had anything like it been tested at all. The scientists who built it had argued bitterly over what it meant. A few had even wondered, half seriously, whether the detonation might ignite the atmosphere and burn the whole world. The mathematics said no, but the truth was, no one fully knew what they had made. They were about to find out over a living city with 250,000 people beneath it. At 12 minutes past 8, Hiroshima time, the Enola Gay reached the edge of the city. The bombardier peered through his sight, searching for the aiming point that had been chosen weeks before from reconnaissance photographs. It was not a military base. It was not a factory. It was a bridge. The Ioy Bridge, a distinctive T-shaped crossing in the very heart of the city, easy to recognize from the air. The target was the center of Hiroshima itself, the center of its people. At 15 minutes and 17 seconds past 8, the bomb bay doors snapped open and Little Boy fell free. Relieved of its enormous weight, the aircraft lurched upward, and Tibbets threw her into a hard, diving turn designed to put as much distance as possible between the plane and what was about to happen. And the bomb began its fall, 43 seconds. In the first seconds, it dropped through cool, thin air, tumbling, then stabilizing as its tail fins caught the wind. Below, the city was waking fully into the morning. On the Ioy Bridge, traffic moved. Along the riverbanks, people walked past the Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall, a handsome building with a distinctive copper dome. In the schoolyards, thousands of teenagers, boys and girls mobilized for the war effort, were gathering outdoors to clear fire breaks, demolishing wooden houses by hand to stop future fires from spreading. They were in the open. They were looking up at the strange, beautiful summer sky. Some of them saw it. A few people in the last seconds noticed a tiny dark object falling or caught a glint of metal. Perhaps they pointed. Perhaps a parent told a child not to stare at the sun. At 8:15 and 43 seconds, at an altitude of roughly 1,900 feet, about 580 meters above a courtyard near the Shima Hospital, just a few hundred meters from the target bridge, the mechanism inside Little Boy fired. The uranium slammed together, and the chain reaction began. What happened next happened faster than thought. In a fraction of a second, a fireball was born in the sky above Hiroshima. At its core, the temperature climbed to several million degrees. For an instant, a small piece of the surface of a star hanging over a city of wood and paper and people. Directly beneath it, at ground level, the heat reached somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 degrees Celsius. To understand that number, remember that iron melts at around 1,500. The granite of the steps, the clay of the roof tiles, began to bubble and change. People directly below did not burn in the way we usually imagine burning. They were gone in an instant, sometimes leaving only a shadow. This is one of the most haunting details of Hiroshima. The flash was so intense that where a person or an object blocked it, the surface behind stayed pale while everything around it was scorched darker. On the stone steps of a bank, there remained the faint outline of a human being who had been sitting there, waiting for the doors to open. The person was gone. The shadow stayed. We still have photographs of those shadows. They are, in a sense, the only graves of people whose names we will never know. Then came the blast. The explosion released a wave of pressure that raced outward from the fireball faster than the speed of sound. It tore through the city like the slap of an invisible hand, the size of the sky. Buildings did not fall. They were swept away. Within a radius of more than a mile, almost every structure was flattened. Wooden homes simply ceased to exist. Heavy roof tiles had their surfaces melted and blistered by the heat. Iron bridges buckled. The blast was so strong that it stripped clothing from bodies, drove fragments of glass deep into walls, and hurled human beings hundreds of feet through the air. And then the wind reversed. As the superheated air above the city rose, it created a vacuum, and the air rushed back inward, dragging dust, debris, and smoke up into a single rising column. That column climbed and spread and blossomed at its top into the shape the 20th century would never forget. The mushroom cloud, boiling, churning, rising tens of thousands of feet into the sky, visible from 100 miles away. The crew of the Enola Gay, now several miles distant, felt the shockwave catch them and shake the aircraft. They looked back. The co-pilot was keeping a log. In that moment, he wrote, or later said he had written, 5 words. "My God, what have we done?" Below them, where the heart of a city had been only a minute before, there was a flat, smoking plain. But the dying was not over. In many ways, it had only just begun. The flash and the blast killed perhaps 70 to 80,000 people in the first instant, but Hiroshima was built largely of wood, and across the ruins, thousands of cooking fires, broken stoves, and shattered electrical lines ignited. The countless small fires merged into a single monstrous one, a firestorm that swept across the flattened city, generating its own howling winds, pulling the air inward and roasting everything it touched. People who had survived the blast, trapped beneath collapsed buildings, called out for help that could not come. The fire reached them first. Those who could move fled toward the rivers. Hiroshima sits on a delta threaded with water, and the water promised relief from the unbearable heat and from the terrible burns that covered so many of the survivors. They crowded the banks. They climbed into the rivers. Many never climbed out. And then, about half an hour to an hour after the explosion, it began to rain. But this was not ordinary rain. The fireball had thrown enormous quantities of dust, ash, and radioactive particles high into the atmosphere. Now it came back down, mixed with moisture in great heavy drops, dark and sticky and cold. The survivors called it the Black Rain. To people burned and parched and desperate, the rain seemed at first like mercy, and many opened their mouths to it. They did not know that it was thick with radiation, and that this poison would work its way into their bodies in the days and weeks to come. This was the part of the new weapon that no ordinary bomb had ever carried. Even people who looked untouched, who had survived the flash, the blast, and the fire without a scratch, began, in the following days, to fall ill. Their hair fell out in clumps. Purple spots appeared on their skin. They bled from the gums, ran fevers, grew weak, and died. Doctors, themselves injured, with their hospitals destroyed, had no idea what they were seeing. There was no medicine for it, because the world had never seen it before. This was radiation sickness, and it would go on killing long after the fires went out. By the end of 1945, the death toll in Hiroshima had reached around 140,000, and the dying did not stop even then. Over the years that followed, survivors continued to develop cancers and leukemia at rates far above normal. The bomb had a long reach. It killed in seconds, and it also killed across decades. The survivors came to be known by a single word: hibakusha, the people affected by the explosion. There would eventually be hundreds of thousands of them, and they carried a particular kind of suffering. Not only the scars and the illnesses, but a quiet, cruel stigma. In the years after the war, some feared that the hibakusha were contagious, or that their exposure had damaged them in ways that might pass to their children. Survivors hid their history. They struggled to find work, to marry. They had lived through the unimaginable and then often had to live through it alone, in silence. One of them was a little girl named Sadako Sasaki. She was 2 years old on the morning of the bomb, in a house about a mile from the hypocenter. She survived the blast itself, seemingly unhurt, and grew into a bright, fast, athletic child. But at the age of 11, she developed leukemia, the so-called atom bomb disease. In hospital, she began to fold paper cranes. There is an old Japanese belief that one who folds 1,000 origami cranes may be granted a wish, and her wish was simply to live. She folded and folded, far past 1,000. She died in 1955, 10 years after the morning that had quietly marked her. Today, a statue of Sadako, holding a golden crane, stands in the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park, and children from around the world still send paper cranes there by the thousand. 3 days after Hiroshima, on the 9th of August, a second atomic bomb was dropped, this time on the city of Nagasaki. Tens of thousands more died, and on the 15th of August, the Emperor of Japan, in a radio broadcast that most of his people had never heard before, announced his country's surrender, speaking of a new and most cruel bomb. The Second World War, the deadliest conflict in human history, was over. Historians have argued ever since about whether the bombs had to be dropped. Some say they ended the war quickly and saved enormous numbers of lives, Japanese and American alike, that would have been lost in an invasion. Others argue that Japan was already close to collapse, that the bombing of cities full of civilians can never be justified, that the weapons were used as much to make a point to a watching world as to defeat an enemy. These are real questions, heavy ones, and they have no easy answers. They deserve to be wrestled with honestly, not waved away. But there is one thing about which there is no argument at all. After Hiroshima, the world was a different place. For all of human history, no matter how terrible our wars, the species itself had always been safe. We could destroy armies, cities, even whole civilizations, but not ourselves, not all of us. The 43 seconds over Hiroshima ended that. From that morning onward, we have lived in a world where humanity holds the means of its own extinction in its hands. Within a few short years, the bombs grew thousands of times more powerful. Today, there are enough nuclear weapons on Earth to destroy our cities many times over. That is the true weight of those 43 seconds. It was not only the end of a war or the destruction of one beautiful city on a delta of rivers. It was the moment our power to create finally collided with our power to destroy, and the two became forever the same thing. In Hiroshima today, the city is alive again. It was rebuilt. green and bright, and full of people, as if to prove that life is more stubborn than death. But in the center, beside the river, one ruin was deliberately left standing, the skeleton of that handsome building with the copper dome, now stripped to its bare frame, its dome an empty cage of steel. It stood almost directly beneath the explosion, and somehow part of it survived. Today it is called the Atomic Bomb Dome, and it is kept exactly as it was, broken in the middle of a living city. It is there to make sure we never forget what fell out of a clear blue sky one summer morning, and how little time it took. 43 seconds. That is all it took to change what it means to be human. If this story moved you, take a moment to subscribe. We are here to keep history alive, to look honestly at the past so we can understand the world we live in now. And tell me in the comments, do you believe the bombing of Hiroshima can ever be justified, or was a line crossed that morning that should never have been crossed? What would you have done if the decision had been yours? I read every reply. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I will see you in the next story.